We love a tragic character. We've built an entire fandom around this trope. Obito from Naruto, Tamura from My Hero Academia, even Geto from JJK. One Piece has trained us for 2 decades to look at the monster and find the wound underneath. For us to think to ourselves that he was made, not born. That's the formula. We get to feel sophisticated for sympathizing. Loki breaks the formula, and he breaks it in a way that should make you genuinely uncomfortable. Because the usual move, find the moment they were broken, doesn't quite work on him. There is no single tragedy you can point to and say this is where the good child died. You go looking for it and you keep sliding backward in time, past the betrayals, past the chains, past the death of his father, all the way back to a delivery room where a woman looked at a newborn's eyes and decided, before he had drawn a full breath, that he was a curse the world would have to be protected from. That's the difference. That's pretty much the entire video, and I could stop here, but I'm not. So this is going to be a long one. I want to take Loki apart. The prophecy, the underworld, the chains, the father, the fruit, the god, and I want to argue something specific by the end. I want to argue that the most devastating question this character raises isn't, was the prophecy wrong? It's what if it became true? And worse, what if being right about him was never the same thing as being just to him? Let's start. Before Loki was a character, he was a silhouette. Oda introduced the idea of Loki years before he introduced the man. Way back in Whole Cake Island, in the discussions around Big Mom's failed marriage alliance, the broken engagement that tied her to Lola, to Elbaf, to the giants she could never quite conquer. There's an Elbaf prince hovering at the edge of the story, an implied groom, a name that doesn't get a face. For a long stretch of One Piece, Loki was less a person than a piece of political furniture, a reason other people did things, a shape in the negotiation. I find this almost unbearably appropriate, because it's the structure of his entire life compressed into the structure of his publication. Loki existed as an implication before he existed as a self. He was a thing other people talked about, planned around, assigned meaning to, long before he got to walk on stage and say a single word in his own voice. The narrative did to Loki exactly what Elbaf did to Loki. It decided what he was for, and it did so in his absence. 1130, chapter 1130, is when he is finally revealed to us. Luffy finds him, chained, underground. In the roots beneath the treasure tree Adam, in Elbaf's underworld, a grinning prisoner who introduces himself not as a prince, not as a son, but as the sun god who is going to destroy the world. The giants around him tell him that he killed his father, King Harold, to seize a legendary devil fruit. It took the entire combined strength of Elbaf's warriors to put him down. He is the Accursed Prince. He is the shame of Elbaf. That's the introduction. Crime, punishment, label. The man who spent the first chapters of his existence as a rumor is finally given a body, and the body comes preloaded with a verdict. I want you to hold on to that sequencing, because it's going to keep happening. With Loki, the conclusion always arrives before the evidence. Now we go to the bottom of it. Chapter 1153 is, for my money, one of the most quietly depressing backstories Oda has ever written in recent years. And it's horrifyingly depressing simply because nothing supernatural needs to be true for it to destroy a life. Harold, the king of Elbaf, loved a woman named Ida, an outsider, not of the giants' world, and with her he fathered a son, Hadrudin. But there was a problem, a big one at that. He wasn't an ancient giant. Elbaf's elders refused to recognize the child, because Ida was foreign, because the bloodline had to stay clean, because the tribe's idea of itself mattered more than a man's actual love. So Harold, a king bent by his own people's rules, married Estrid instead. A correct marriage, a sanctioned one. And while Harold was away, Estrid gave birth to Loki. She looked at the newborn, his eyes, his strange appearance, something about him that didn't match what a child of Elbaf was supposed to look like. And she called him cursed. She tried to declare him stillborn, and then she threw him into the underworld. A mother looked at her infant and decided he was a monster, and rather than raise him, she disposed of him into a pit beneath a tree, in the dark, to die. We've seen this before, especially the dynamic between Judge and Sanji, but this was just another level. Estrid chose to get rid of Loki simply due to the way he looked. He didn't die. The newborn Loki survived the underworld and climbed back up the treasure tree Adam, an infant, out of the place of the dead, back into the light. And here is where the machine really starts grinding, because of course the child who crawls back out of the grave is going to look like an omen. Estrid then fell ill, and from her sickbed she sharpened the curse into a prophecy. Loki must be eliminated. As the prophecy states, Harold would be killed by him. And as Elbaf's misfortunes accumulated, as bad things happened to any nation across any span of years, they were gathered up and laid at the feet of the cursed child. The crops, the deaths, the losses, his curse, his fault. The problem is not that the prophecy was wrong. The problem is that the people who made it also made it true. Hear me out. Think about what a prophecy actually is in a story like this. It's not a window into the future. It's a permission slip. Once you've decided a child is destined to kill his father and ruin his nation, every single thing you do to that child is justified in advance. You can throw him in a pit to protect everyone. You can deny him love, because love would only empower the curse. You can isolate him, fear him, hate him, and the more isolated and feared and hated he becomes, the more dangerous he looks, which confirms the prophecy, which justifies more isolation. It's a closed loop. It's a perpetual motion machine of cruelty, and the fuel is the very behavior the cruelty produces. A child raised as a weapon will eventually look like one. A child told from birth that he is a destroyer will eventually have nothing left to be but a destroyer. The prophecy didn't predict Loki. The prophecy manufactured the conditions under which someone like Loki becomes the only thing he's allowed to be. And then it pointed at the result and said, see, we were right to fear him. And that's the trap. Decide a person is the problem. Treat them as the problem, and let the treatment generate the proof. He climbed out of the underworld as a newborn, and I keep coming back to that image, because in a way, that basically summarizes the majority of Loki's character. Ever since that day, he has been climbing. At some point you have to ask, what is he climbing toward? That's the question the image plants and refuses to answer, because climbing, as an act, is morally blank. It's just will. It's the refusal to stay where you were put. And Loki has been refusing to stay where he was put since the literal first hour of his life. They put him in the grave. He climbed out. They put him in chains. We'll get to that. Every authority in his story has tried to fix him in place, to define him, contain him, end him. And the defining feature of the man is that he does not stay fixed. We usually frame the climb as aspiration. You climb towards something, a summit, a goal, a better self. Loki's climb didn't start as aspiration. It started as survival in the absence of a destination. He climbed because the alternative was dying in the dark. And when you've spent your entire life climbing without ever being given somewhere to climb to, no home that wanted you, no name that wasn't an insult, no future that wasn't a prophecy of ruin, the climb itself becomes the only identity available. So when he grins out of the underworld and says he'll destroy the world, I don't hear a man who hates the world. I hear a man who has converted pure, directionless will into the only goal big enough to hold it. If everything that was supposed to give your climb a destination has rejected you, then destruction, tearing down the entire structure that defined you as worthless, starts to look less like evil and more like the only coherent target left. The world told him what he was. Fine, he'll aim at the world. This also brings us to Rox Dietzebek, because without Rox, Loki's psychology is incomplete. The legendary pirate, the pre-Roger monster, the man whose name makes the old world sweat. But for Loki, Rox is more intimate than that. Rox is the first adult who seems to look at him and see potential instead of contamination. For a child who has been treated as a curse since before language, even that is oxygen. The flashback shows Loki trying to join Rox's crew, which already tells you something brutal about his internal life. He is trying to attach himself to the one kind of story large enough to rival the curse Elbaf wrote for him. A pirate crew, especially Rox's pirate crew. But for Loki, that may be the closest thing to a future anyone has ever offered him. This is the key difference between Harold and Rox. Harold is the father Loki deserved to have, but could never actually access cleanly. Harold's love is obstructed by politics, by absence, by Estrid's lie, by the whole suffocating structure of Elbaf legitimacy. Rox, on the other hand, does not arrive with the emotional burden of fatherhood. He does not owe Loki tenderness, which means Loki can receive something from him that he cannot receive from Harold without it hurting. Direction. Rox is the man who speaks the language Loki has been forced to learn. The world is rotten, the throne is illegitimate. Power decides what history is allowed to mean, and if the existing order has no place for you, then the only honest answer is to build enough force to break it. Of course that lands with Loki. Of course it does. Imagine being the cursed child of Elbaf and hearing a man say, in effect, the problem is not that you do not belong inside the world. The problem is that the world is too small and too false to contain you. Rox may have been the first person to make Loki's destruction feel principled. That does not mean Rox saved him. I actually think the opposite is more interesting. Rox does not rescue Loki from the curse. Rox gives the curse a politics. Before Rox, Loki's rage is a wound looking for a wall. After Rox, that rage has a shape. The boy who was told he would destroy the world meets a man who wants to overturn the world, and suddenly the prophecy stops sounding like a condemnation and starts sounding like a job description. The first person who made Loki feel seen may also have taught him how to mistake annihilation for purpose. Loki keeps trying to leave Elbaf and follow Rox, even to the point of nearly drowning as a stowaway. He is chasing the only adult vision of the future that has ever sounded larger than his cage. Elbaf gives him a past he can never escape. Rox gives him a horizon, And once a person has lived his whole life underground, a horizon can feel like salvation even when it is on fire. Rocks gave Loki a version of the world where destruction could be meaningful, where the person branded as a curse could reinterpret himself as an agent of cosmic correction. That's why the rocks dynamic had to exist. It prevents Loki from being only a victim of Elbaf. It makes him a student of revolt. The prophecy told him he was destruction. Rocks taught him destruction could have a target. Let's also talk about the way he was introduced here before we move on. The cool image of the imprisoned monster waiting to be unleashed. The image of Loki being chained. And the chains itself are not a solution. It is an argument about what happens when you imprison the thing you fear instead of asking why you are afraid of it. Elbaf is a warrior nation. It prides itself on honor, on strength, on facing things head on. And what did its proudest culture do with the problem of Loki? It didn't face him. It buried him. Twice. Once as an infant in the underworld, and once as a man in chains beneath the same tree. The chains are Elbaf admitting it has no answer. Every link in that prison is the nation saying we would rather contain this forever than ever look at how we made it. And containment is seductive precisely because it feels like safety while changing nothing. The chains let everyone sleep at night. The monster's restrained. The threat is managed. The question is closed. But the question isn't closed. It's just postponed. And it accrues interest. Years of a man marinating in the exact narrative they imposed on him, with nothing to do but get more like the thing they said he was. They feared he'd destroy the world, so they gave him years to think of nothing else. Rather than the chains neutralizing the quote-unquote destroyer, it served as an incubator. This is, I'd argue, Oda doing political philosophy in the body of a giant. And it is genius. There's a word in Norse for what's being done to him. And we have to talk about the myth now, because it's the key that unlocks the whole design. "1170 gave us name to Loki's devil fruit. This was without a doubt one of the most anticipated reveals, maybe ever. The dragon fruit, model nidhoggr, an ancient zoan, name for the Norse dragon Nidhogg. And the mythology here is so on the nose that I want to slow down and read it as the character key it obviously is. In Norse myth, Nidhogg is the serpent that gnaws at the roots of Yggdrasil, the world tree. The dragon at the bottom of the structure, chewing at the foundation that holds everything up. Its role at Ragnarok, the end of the world, is ominous and genuinely disputed by scholars. It's a creature of endings whose exact allegiance is unclear. Already you can feel the resonance. The man Elbaf buried at the roots of the treasure tree Adam carries the spirit of the dragon that lives at the roots of the world tree. The name Nidhogg is often parsed with the element Neo. I'm having a hard time pronouncing this word, so I'll have it on screen. Neo in Old Norse isn't a neutral word. It refers to social disgrace, the loss of honor, the status of being branded a villain, an outcast, a shameful thing. The other common reading connects it to down or below, which, sure, the dragon at the bottom, also perfect. A nidhoggr was the worst thing you could be called, not just an enemy, but a person stripped of social worth. An honorless thing the community is entitled to despise. The shame of Elbaf carries the fruit of the god whose name means shame. Oda's being surgical here. He picked it because the etymology is the character. Loki's curse was never really the prophecy. The curse was the Neo, the verdict of dishonor, the social branding, the decision by the community that he is a thing without worth. The devil fruit just gave a mythic name to the condition he was born into. He is, in the most literal etymological sense, the god of being declared unworthy. And what does the god of being declared unworthy do? He gnaws at the roots of the structure that declared him so. When the fruit awakens, and Loki annihilates dozens of nightmare monsters with a torrent of lightning from his mouth, when his hammer Ragnir, a living weapon that can shapeshift into a squirrel and chose Loki as its master, reveals itself, even the throne notices. Imu, through Gunko, recognizes that the legendary Nidhoggr was on Elbaf all along. The detail I love most there is the hammer choosing him. After a lifetime of everyone deciding what he is, a legendary weapon looks at him and elects him. The one thing in his story that picks Loki freely is an instrument of force. Even his moments of being chosen are martial. The world keeps handing this man weapons, and then acting surprised that he's armed. Now there's a theological knot here that I want to untangle. Loki calls himself the sun god. And that should stop you cold, because we already have a sun god in this story. Chapter 1136 tells us that there are multiple interpretations to what the sun god actually is. God of liberation, god of destruction, god of laughter, and it's the same chapter that fills in a chunk of Loki's recent history, that Shanks caught and stopped Loki 6 years before the present day, and that the Holy Knights, Gunko among them, came to recruit Loki. They wanted him. The world government looked at this chain destroyer and saw an asset. Loki refused, and when they pressed, when Gunko attacked and subdued the giant wolf that was Loki's companion, he didn't break toward them. He told them, flatly, that he would not serve the world nobles. and that he would channel his negative emotions toward destroying the world. I want to dwell on that refusal, because it's the most important ethical data point we have about Loki, and it cuts directly against the "he's just a monster" reading. Here is a man with every reason to hate the world, being offered power, legitimacy, and an outlet for his rage by the most powerful institution alive. And he says no. He does not want to be owned. He will not let the throne, another authority deciding what he's for, convert his destruction into their destruction. His rage is his. His climb is his. He'd rather aim at everything than be aimed by them. Nihilist? No. That's the psychology of a man whose one remaining possession is his own refusal to be defined again. And it tells you that whatever Loki's wrath is, it has a spine. It has a thing it will not do. So now hold the two suns next to each other. Luffy and Loki. Luffy is Nika, the sun god of liberation, the warrior of joy who frees people. Loki is Nidhogg, the root-gnawing dragon, the destructive principle. Two faces of the sun. One sun gives life and warmth and freedom. The same sun, in a different myth, burns. The scorching, world-ending sun, the searcher fire that consumes the world tree at the end. Harald's death is without a doubt the most load-bearing, life-changing event in Loki's life. At the beginning of Elbaf, what we knew was brutal and simple. Loki killed his father to take a legendary devil fruit, patricide for power, the prophecy fulfilled, the curse confirmed. It's the cleanest possible proof that Estrid was right, that the chains were justified, that the Accursed Prince is exactly what they always said. But later revelations reframed everything, and I want to be precise about what kind of reframing it is, because it's easy to overstate. Loki did kill Harald, with new powers, in the moment those powers awakened. That part holds. What changes is everything around the act. When Loki arrived at the throne room, what he found was Harald already impaled by his own guards. Harald, who had entered into a depth's covenant with Imu, had been corrupted by it, was being controlled by it, and was in the process of turning into something that was not Harald anymore. The entity wearing Harald's body was moving toward the castle with power that would have destroyed Elbaf. Loki intervened. He killed what his father had become in order to prevent what his father had become from killing everyone else. He begged Loki to kill him. Loki didn't want to. His entire life of being branded as a monster, being told what he is ordered by his own father to kill him. These sequences of panels absolutely gutted me. Loki wept over his father's body. Gaban, Chief Jarl, and Shanks were all there. They knew exactly what happened. Loki asked them to keep the truth secret. He leaves with the surviving guards, telling them he will go to sea to avenge Harald. He does not explain himself to the kingdom. He accepts the blame. He accepted condemnation rather than tell the whole truth. He let them brand him, and he turned that acceptance into a plan. Revenge, deferred. Harald wanted him to tell the people of Elbaf what happened. He simply didn't want to. To him, being condemned and branded was normal, and he was used to it. A man who has spent his entire life being blamed for things that were not his fault, who was blamed for a famine before he could walk, who was declared a curse before he could speak, decides that one more accusation is simply the price he pays for the truth being too complicated to tell. He has been living inside other people's narratives about him for so long that slipping into the role of Harald's killer requires no adaptation. It fits like chains that have been on long enough to shape the skin. The problem is not that the prophecy was wrong. The problem is that the people who made it also made it true. And then, when the truth was more complicated than the prophecy, Loki chose the prophecy anyway, because it was the only role anyone had ever prepared for him. Later, after Hadrudin freed him, that same father killer fought to protect his country. The man who was given nothing and built anyway. This is a story about the things that make you strong, whether that is your crew, mentor, friends, the people that believe in you. Loki developed power in the absolute absence of every single one of those resources. No mentor, no crew, no friends, no one who believed in him except his father, which he killed with his own hands. Loki is by far among the most morally dangerous characters Oda has put on paper, without being reduced to the role Elbaf assigned him. So the question now isn't whether the prophecy that has plagued Loki's life is wrong or not. The question is whether being right is the same as being just. Because Elbaf was, in the most literal predictive sense, possibly right about Loki, and it was catastrophically, irredeemably unjust to him. And those two things can both be true. You can be an accurate prophet of a future you are personally building. The rightness doesn't cleanse the injustice. The injustice doesn't cancel the rightness. They just sit there, together, indicting everyone. That's exactly how Oda intended to construct it. If Loki turns out harmless, the chains were a 63-year crime against an innocent. If Loki turns out to be the world destroyer they feared, then the chains were a 63-year crime that created the very monster they were meant to contain. There's no version of this where Elbaf comes out clean. Either they tortured an innocent or they engineered a catastrophe. Being right buys them nothing, because the rightness was self-inflicted. A society that makes its nightmares come true does not get to feel vindicated when they arrive. And that's the question Loki forces onto the entire One Piece world. The same question that's been humming under the Void Century and the throne and the whole rotten structure. What do you owe the people you were right to fear? What is the just response to a danger you yourself created? Elbaf's answer was chains. The world government's answer is erasure. Okay, prediction time. If this is your first time tuning into the channel, I'll just inform you guys that I am not a One Piece theorist. I could be wrong, and probably will be. But for this video, I'll make an exception. So, Loki will not become a softened ally. Forget the redemption arc where the misunderstood prince learns to trust again. Instead, Loki becomes something far more interesting and far more frightening. A catastrophic ally. A man whose rage points, by accident or by fate, in the same direction as liberation. He and Luffy aren't going to be friends in any soft sense. They're going to be the two sons, aimed at the same structure for completely different reasons. Luffy wants to free people. Loki wants to destroy the thing that cursed him. And it turns out those are the same target. Because the thing that curses people and the thing that imprisons people are the same throne, the same red line, the same world government, the same 800-year lie. Nika frees the world by lifting it into joy. Nidhogg frees the world by gnawing through the root it's chained to. Same liberation. Two different suns, one sun warms, one sun burns. And I'd like to bring this up again. As I mentioned earlier, Nidhogg gnaws the roots of the world tree. What is the structural root of the One Piece world? The thing that holds the whole architecture together, the spine the world government is built on. It's the red line. The continent-spanning wall that divides the seas, that holds up Mary Joie. That is the physical body of the world order. If Oda gave a man the spirit of the dragon that chews through the foundation of the world, and dropped him into a story whose central structure is a literal world-spanning wall, I do not think that's decoration. I think Loki will be or one of the catalysts who brings down the red line. The god of being declared unworthy, demolishing the structure that declares worth. The root dragon, eating the root. That's why Imu wants to erase him specifically. Because Imu, who can see the shape of myth better than anyone, knows what nidhoggr is for. You don't fear a man this much because he's strong. Kaido was strong. You fear a man this much because his existence is pointed at the load-bearing wall of your entire reality. The tragedy completes itself. The world made a destroyer, chained the destroyer, refused to free or understand the destroyer, and the destroyer is going to do precisely what they always said he'd do. And in doing it, he's going to free everyone the same world enslaved. The prophecy comes true. Estrid was right. And being right will mean nothing, because the catastrophe she predicted will land on the throne that engineered it. Loki has been climbing, ascending his entire life. He climbed out of the underworld as a newborn. He has been climbing ever since, and after everything, after the prophecy and the chains and the father and the throne, after the whole world spent 63 years deciding what he was for, I think we finally know what he's been climbing toward. The Accursed Prince. He's going to look at the thing everyone is standing on, the thing they built their whole order upon, and he is going to bring it down to the roots.